Welcome back. In the last video we set up the screen and the seal class even with objects and stuff like that. So this might be a little confusing at first, but you will see how we are going to use it, and that's going to save you a lot of headaches later on. I just wanted to state that once again. Now let's go ahead and create an app that will take care of basically the app. So far we just have this main activity that takes care of the app, but the main activity should be the entry point, but then it should directly run our app, which then runs our screens. So the app is basically taking care of the navigation as we have seen before. So let's go ahead and create a new file, which I'm going to call recipe app. And let's do so. All right, so the recipe app will be a composable, and this composable will be called recipe app. It will require a nav controller of type nav controller, and then inside of it I'm going to get the recipe view model of type main view model, and I'm going to default that with view model. All right, and without initializer, just a default view model. And then we need the state, so the view state, which I'm gonna use by recipe view model dot category state. Okay, so let's import that. Now, what is this category state? If you look at our main view model, we had set up the main view model quite some time ago, and it had taken care of this category state, which is a state of type recipe state, and it just takes care of the recipe that, well, the list of all of the recipes, basically the list in our case of the recipe categories. So now we want to use that in order to know what we need to pass. So which one the user clicked on, for example, to go from one screen to another. So our recipe app needs that information, and we'll use that view state to not only go over to the other screen, but also, well, to display the recipe screen. I'm going to use set up the nav host now, which requires a nav controller. So we're going to pass the nav controller from here, and it requires a start location. So I'm going to get rid of this graph here. I'm going to say start destination, and now we need to pass the start destination, which I'm going to use screen dot recipe screen dot root. So what is this? The thing is, I use this screen really just for this root property, so that this one global static variable that will not be changed, and so that I can access it and never run into problems. So basically here instead I could have just said the root should be whatever root name you want to give it. So for example, recipe screen, right? Recipe screen. But instead of doing that, I'm using this here to avoid running into errors. Okay, so this nav host now also needs to execute some code. And by the way, I realized that my recipe app should not have a nav controller, but a nav host controller. So nav host controller. Okay, because that's what this nav host requires. It needs a nav host controller type. So we can get rid of this nav controller. And now this nav host controller can take care of the two different composables. So we have the composable for our recipe screen, and we have the one for our detailed screen. So here we can just use the root to be the same thing as we had here. So screen recipe screen root. So it's just our way to making sure that we don't mistype or anything. And then now that we have the root, we can say what the composable is that should be displayed in there, and in our case it's going to be the recipe screen. Now the recipe screen needs to have the navigate to detail, and I'm also going to make sure that it requires a state. Let me see here. So it needs to navigate to detail, but we're also going to require the view state. So instead of creating it in here, we're going to pass it from our recipe app. So let's get rid of this here, the view state, and actually set it up in here, where we're going to have view state of type main view model dot recipe state. Okay, so the recipe screen will now need the view state as well, and that will then be the same view state that we'll use here. So you see nothing else changes. We don't need to set up the view model in here. We're going to take care of that inside of our recipe app. So the screen should not take care of that. It's going to be the app itself. So here we have the view state. Now we can pass the view state as well as the navigation, as well as the navigate to detail. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to implement the navigate to detail code like so, but then we also need to have the view state in here. So I'm just going to pass the view state. So view state will be view state. Okay, this one here. So that's what our recipe screen needs, because that's what we set up here, right? We said, hey, we need the view state. Now you get the view state, and you need to now implement what navigate to detail should do, because that's what our navigate to detail needs here. It needs the category, and then it will execute some code, or we need to implement what it should execute. Now, what should it execute? Well, actually, we want to move from one screen to another, right? And we get the category here. You see, we get it category. Well, we're going to require this category, and we get the category. The thing is, now this will be a little more complicated what we're going to do here. Okay, so I'm going to say nav controller dot current backstack entry dot saved state handle dot set. So these are all nullables. So that's why I'm setting the question mark in there. And I'm going to call this cat, and I'm going to pass it. Okay. And then I'm going to use this nav controller to navigate. And navigate. Now I need to say to which screen or to which route I want to navigate. I want to navigate the screen dot detail screen dot route. Okay, let's go over what just happened, because a lot happened. So let me actually paste that in here. I have a really good explanation of what happens here. This will be a comment. So this part is responsible for passing data from the current screen to the detail screen. So this part here retrieves the current navigation backstack entry, which represents the current screen state within the navigation graph. So we have this navigation, basically we have a starting point. So the screen, let's say the recipe screen, then let's say we go to the category detail screen. On the category detail screen, there might be another screen, we click in there. So all of this flow is stored inside of this backstack entry. Now the saved state handle is a mechanism for passing data between different screens using the Jetpack Compose navigation. It provides a way to store and retrieve data that needs to be passed to the next screen. So then we have this setCatIt. So this method sets a key value pair in the saved state handle inside of here. The key of this key value pair is key cat and value it. So which is the category that we get from here. Okay, and which is the category that we get from the recipe screen, if you recall. So here we pass this navigate to detail in there. Okay, and the key is used as a reference to retrieve the data on the detail screen. So basically here we're saying, hey, this is where we're storing the category. Now on the detail screen, we need to retrieve this information. And here we're initiating the navigation to the detail screen, and it uses the nav controller to navigate the screen represented by screen.details.route, which is inside of screens, it's this one here. So it takes this detail screen route. Now we can set up the detail screen. So here I'm going to have another composable, and not in here, but outside of here. So let me make sure that I'm at the right spot. So here I'm going to use composable. I'm going to set the route to be screen dot recipes. This time is the detail screen.root. Okay, so we get the detail screen now. That will be the root. And then we will, and then we get the animated content scope, but also the navigation backstack entry. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that backstack entry to get the category. So here I'm going to say val category will be nav controller dot previous backstack entry, which is another step at the current backstack entry, which is a nullable. And then we get the saved state handle, which is again a nullable. And then we get the key, and the key that we want to get is going to be of type category, or like the value will be of type category. So we just say get of type category and then the key itself, and the key is cat. And if that is null, then we're just going to set the category to be category with the details of an empty category ID, then an empty string category and an empty thumbnail, as well as an empty description. So what is this entire line? Let me put that into a separate line so it's more readable. So basically we're saying, and this get should be here. Okay, like so. So this is just one line. Okay, this is still one line. We're saying the category, we want to get that from our save state handle, which was this thing here. So we saved it in there, and that was the current backstack. But once we click and go to the next screen, we navigate to the next screen, we need to get the previous backstack entry. So basically now that we moved to another screen, there is another component on that backstack. But we want to have the old version of the backstack, which is the previous backstack entry. And from there, we get this save state handle, which is basically like a container that we can set our variables in. And I'm just saying at the key pair, or at the key cat, I'm setting the category that I'm getting. Now I'm retrieving the category, and I'm saying the type of that thing that I'm retrieving is going to be of type category, and the position where it is, so the key is cat. So this will be it basically, and stored inside of category. And it is whatever we had here passed inside of the recipe screen, which when we create the recipe screen, we will pass a category. So then if cat is empty, we're creating an empty category, basically saying no ID, no string, no image, no description. All right, so that's basically what we're doing in here. And now we actually need to pass that category to the category detail screen. So let's just do that. And this will then be the actual composable, which is our category detail screen, this one here, which needed a category to be displayed on the detail screen. Okay, so a lot has gone on. Now there are only two more things left to do, and then we're done with this this navigation. So inside of the main activity, I want to go to the recipe app, not the recipe screen, but I want to go to the recipe app, which needs a nav controller. So we can create a nav controller inside of our set content here. So val nav controller, which will be of type remember nav controller. Okay, so we're setting up a nav controller, and then we can pass this nav controller to our recipe app. And if you recall, our recipe app just needed the nav controller. Now from there, it could take care of the navigation. Okay, so there's one last thing, as I said, I want to do, and that will be serialization and deserialization. I'm going to implement it in this video and test the app, but I'm going to explain it in the next video. Now inside of our build.gradle, this one here, the module one, we have the application and Jetpack Kotlin Android. Now here we are going to add another plugin, and it's called Kotlin-Parcelize, like so. And this should be inside of a parentheses, like so. Okay, let me sync that. So I synced it, and now this will allow us to parcelize objects. Okay, we're going to see what that means in the next video. But for now, let's make sure that our category is going to be parcelizable. Add parcelize, like so, parcelize, and it's this one here. And then we need to make this a parcelable, like so. And now let's run the app. And as I said, I'm going to explain it in depth in the next video. This video is long enough already. Okay, so there's our app. Let's go to beef, and we see we get the details about beef. Now let's swipe back, get the chicken, we get the chicken details. Now let's swipe back again. And I believe, what was it that had a very long details? Pork, right? So here you can see we have this scroll view where we can actually scroll inside of texts. Okay, so our application works, and there was a lot of work involved for the navigation in here, but I'm going to go over one last thing in the next video, and that is this parcelize concept that I just implemented but didn't explain. So let's do that in the next video.